Hey everyone, thank you very much for joining me. This is Darren, head of remote at GitLab, and today I'm joined by Anna-Karin of Because Mondays. We're going to talk all things remote work. So thank you very much for joining me. Give the audience a bit of background on who you are and what Because Mondays is about, and then feel free to verbalize your first question.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me. And so I'm AK of Because Mondays. And what we do is that me and Martin, who started Because Mondays, we love to help people find what they're truly passionate about and help them explore that journey, how they can make that passion fit with their life and help them to start freelance with this. And what we also see is that it's very interesting for people now to start to not be limited to an office space. And even though we can help people strive for living a life where they can actually choose where they work from, we see that not all workplaces where they can actually then have assignments are adapted to this new way of thinking. So we started researching how different companies are approaching remote, both whole companies, but also when you have remote workers. And that's why this opportunity is amazing to get to pick your brain.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Okay, so I can just start?
Absolutely.
Then my first question is, so during the years that GitLab has been working with distributed teams, like what are your most important learnings?
A few key learnings. The first is empowerment is critical. So this doesn't come naturally to a lot of leaders where you initially think to structure the organization to maintain control. And actually one of the things that I've seen in successful distributed teams is relinquishing and delegating as much of that control as you possibly can, even if it feels unnatural. So in my years of leading remote teams, we actually encourage junior staff and interns to contribute ideas because a lot of the times they're a bit far removed from kind of the day-to-day, the siloed nature of work, and some of the best ideas can come from that perspective. So empowering all members of the organization, really, really critical. It's also important to foster an environment of trust. This sounds easier than it actually is. It needs to be woven into the culture, which is one that you eschew judgment and you give teams grace to make mistakes. At GitLab, we actually have one of our sub-values that says it's impossible to know everything and accepting uncertainty. And those two are really foundational to building the culture around, look, it's okay that you're diving into a project or a problem and you don't know everything in advance. For whatever reason, this is actually very rare at companies. People feel this subtle pressure to deliver perfection the first time around, even though they're still gathering knowledge as one would go. So we found that if you can foster an environment of trust and give people the ability to kind of experiment and grace to make mistakes, you'll end up with a much stronger team that will work a lot harder to further the business because they aren't afraid of drastic consequences if they don't get it right the very first time. And I think lastly, self-awareness and empathy are really critical to success, especially in a fully remote organization where you don't see someone face-to-face in an office every single day. Really important to find team members that are empathetic and that can put themselves in the shoes of someone else and can empathize with someone in a different setting, in a different culture, in a different country. It can be isolating to work remotely. So you need people that have a high degree of self-awareness and that want to empathize and to learn more about other people. It's kind of an underrated skill. It's a little bit difficult to interview for, but I think past reputation and past references can go a long way to understanding if somebody is empathetic in that way.
To go back to what you said about like delegating or like, distributing more like power and trusting people. Like this is something that, I read about it a lot. Like psychological safety is important. We need to trust each other. And if we're gonna be able to move fast, we need to delegate like also decision-making power. But how do you, like what level do you think this has to start at?
It's got to start at the very top. If you see your executive suite never delegating or never empowering anyone else to make a decision on their behalf, people learn by what they see.
Mm.
And this actually, for GitLab and for other organizations that I've worked with that have done this well, I think it actually all starts from a process standpoint. So the people are important, and people will generally mirror other people to learn how they should function within an organization. But at GitLab, we document everything. And so we try to put as much documentation and process around every possible decision. And we link back to our values on using those values as the North Star to make every decision if there's any gray area that hasn't been documented. So strangely enough, I think process and documentation play just as much a role in empowering trust as people. Because if you just rely on people to get to know each other or word of mouth at scale, that's really, really difficult to do because people don't know each other, or they come on a few years into the company's path and they can't possibly get to know the hundreds of people on an intimate level. So documentation kind of fills that void. When they have questions on trust, they go back to the documentation of how that groundwork has been laid before their arrival.
And am I correct if I then translate that into something that will be easier? Because I'm always looking for these steps that I'm, as an individual, can take tomorrow. Like, can I make a little change tomorrow? That's better than sort of waiting for the big wave. Right. So if I'm not the executive, can I then sort of look to the process that is closest to me and see if I can affect the process to be more remote friendly if I'm not like on one-on-one with the executives?
Sure, absolutely. No, and that's actually the ethos of iteration, is to try to make minimum viable change, make the smallest possible change such that it's not drastic or catastrophic if it ends up not being the correct decision or if it needs to be course corrected. That's the spirit of iteration, and GitLab tries to embrace that. So absolutely, if you are in that position where you want to influence and change, you do need some amount of buy-in from your manager such that they will actually hear you out on putting forth the change. It really works beautifully at GitLab because we use GitLab to make these changes. So we have something called a merge request, which is just that, a request. So you can lay out your argument, make your case for something, put it in a request, and then assign it to someone who would be the directly responsible individual for that. And if they accept the request, great. If they don't, you can try a different tact, or they might massage it or edit it somewhat. That's kind of where I would think to act. If you're talking about tactical takeaways that you can do tomorrow, take a look at any process where you think, I actually might have a better idea on this, or I think I can put together a group that might have a good idea on how to improve this, and start asking to make those changes. I would shoot for something smaller rather than larger, so people don't kind of have this knee-jerk reaction to, oh, if we make this change, what's the domino effect going to be? Start with something really small and start building the culture of, hey, it's okay to iterate. This isn't going to be in the end of the world if we make this change. And if you start seeing that come to life and you start building examples of that throughout the organization, it really starts to proliferate, because people love to be empowered. People love to, even if they don't want to make the change themselves, they love that they're in an environment where if they do think of something that they could make better somewhere down the road, hypothetically, it's fun to work in an environment where that would be taken seriously and listened to.
Hmm. One thing, when I read, because I mean, I read your remote handbook, or, you know, you have a lot of information online, which is great to get to sort of, you know, pick and choose for in my own time. But when I work in like some tech companies, and usually like we're standing there and we say like, okay, so working software over documentation. And, you know, when asked to document, like as a developer, I would be like, oh, you know, it would be a bit of a threshold to do that. So was that a tough shift for you guys in the beginning?
It still is. It's one of the most difficult things we do, is to get people to work handbook first. So this is woven into the fabric of GitLab, handbook first, but it's still really difficult to get people to do it. So handbook first is the concept of, if you have a change or you want to put forth a solution to an issue, document it in the handbook first. So that's our public handbook. We use GitLab to build it, but there are other tools like Ask Almanac and Fellow that you can build these handbooks. If you document it in the handbook, then you disseminate it through email or Slack or phone call or carrier pigeon, whatever. But don't do it in reverse. Don't say the change in Slack and then go to document it. Now, this is the natural human inclination, is to just take the path of least resistance, do anything other than document it in the handbook, because that requires a lot more work. There's some technical elements to understanding GitLab. If you have a mysterious pipeline failure, then you have to dig in and figure out what that is. You have to make sure it doesn't overwrite something else that someone else did, so on and so forth. So there are some layers of friction to documenting in the handbook that act as natural barriers to convincing people to work that way. So it just takes a lot of repetition, handbook first, handbook first, handbook first. But I think when people start to really get it and they start to embrace it, is when they think of an issue that they're having and they go search our handbook and they find a documented solution such that they don't have to ask anyone. It's the most efficient way to find an answer. Even if it's in the middle of the night and no one's up, it's there. They can use it. This is tactical information they can use. If ever they're in a situation where the handbook pays off for them, it immediately kind of flips their mindset of, oh, I should actually begin to pay it forward. If I come across something where I ask a question, it has not been answered yet, it hasn't been documented. Once I find the answer to that, I should then immediately document it such that everyone that comes after me, if they have the same question, will be able to find it. That, if you can scale that and you get people in this mindset of paying it forward and benefiting from the handbook and then putting their documentation in the handbook to benefit others, that's kind of an ideal case scenario. But without question, it takes a lot of reminding because it is slower, but you have to create a culture where it's okay to go slow, to go faster long term. Because what's going to happen if you don't do that is people lose a lot of what they learn every single day. A lot of things come in one ear and then life happens and you just kind of forget about it. You like have vague recollection of what it is you heard. So then you end up having meeting after meeting after meeting to essentially rehash what was already discussed a few days or weeks or years earlier. This is an extremely inefficient way to learn, and you get watered down hand-me-downs of information. So you're much more efficient long-term to document it in the moment, even though it takes longer. But it's a forced habit. You really have to kind of force yourself to do it because it's not the natural inclination.
When you spoke there, how I started thinking about it would be, because I'm more, my work would be more sort of finding the problems that we're solving and then packaging them up and then start to talk to people like, how can we move forward with the solution? So for me, it would be more like, so then the handbook would be the birth of the problem. And then it's like attackable. Absolutely. So I can start to reference it like, but there it is. And it has a place to stay where the definition is. And then I can work from there.
Absolutely. And actually that's the right way to think about it. So that's taking a very iterative approach. So don't wait until you have the full solution packaged to create the handbook page with the subhead of the problem. So at GitLab, we actually encourage people to create a new section or a new handbook page based on something that they want to solve. And even if they just put 2 or 3 lines for now, that gives an overview of what it is. And they say, this team is working on this. Once we have a solution, we'll create a new merge request and update this page. That way, if someone else on the team or in the organization is having this same problem and they search for it, yes, they won't find the solution yet, but they'll at least find a documented proof that people are working on it. And then they'll know who to reach out to add their insights. So that's yet another benefit to being okay with imperfection and just getting something out there as a foundational layer and then constantly building upon it. In this world where we're so used to these surprise and delight moments where something is launched and it's just fully packaged and fully baked and they've thought about everything in advance and it's just all delivered to you in one fell swoop. This is the nature of marketing and advertising, but that doesn't really work well when you're building a culture and you're building a team. But it's what we're conditioned to because it's what we see pretty much everywhere else. So having to kind of unlearn that and kind of force yourself to not do as you have seen in the advertising and marketing world takes some work and some reminding.
Yeah, so that is sort of how we can start. And then I would like to ask about, so it feels to me like as I started researching about remote, I discovered that it's a lot further along than I suspected. And there are also a lot more companies out there that are fully distributed. But then still, when I go to my office and I talk about this and we're going to hire, and I ask, so like, are we considering a remote position for this role? And it's still like, no, but it's going to be easier if we can sit together. It's going to be so much faster, and the time difference, like, it's really difficult. We need to be able to move fast. Like, even though I've read now, like, about how companies that have more experience have dealt with it, I still feel like I can't really give good enough support in that beginning phase to even argue for like a remote position. So what would be your advice to sort of those companies that still feel like, but it's a big void, like I can't even imagine this being us. Like, what would be a good way to sort of start shifting that mentality?
This is a great question, and we get this often. So I actually stood up a page within our all remote handbook on transitioning companies, either co-located or hybrid remote, into more remote or fully remote. And we are going to continue to iterate this as we learn and we have more case studies and examples that show up. I think what you're seeing is that the path of least resistance for a co-located company, or someone that hasn't worked remotely before, or hasn't managed a remote team before, or hasn't had a good experience with a remote team before, the default is to just say, no, we're not going to do remote. But if you unpack that a little bit, what they're probably saying is, I have some fears about it working, or I don't actually trust myself to have the management capability to manage someone remotely. So therefore, instead of learning how to do it, I'm just not going to hire someone that's remote. That's kind of the underlying thing for a lot of managers, because they just haven't had the opportunity to manage remotely. Nothing against them, they just haven't had that chance. So it's difficult now to convince a company that is really bent on not implementing remote. But I think what you're going to see is quite quickly the world's best talent will gravitate to companies that are more flexible, that allow them to work from anywhere. And even if they love working in an office, the ability to work in a co-working space around people when you want to, but then also have the flexibility to work at home or at a family member's house or wherever when you need to, that's kind of the ultimate new workplace perk. So foosball tables, beer on tap, all of those kinds of things to make offices super flashy so you never want to leave. Honestly, the world's best workers aren't interested in that. If they're able to work from home and they have an appropriate space, they can buy their own custom foosball table that works for them. They can have a refrigerator full of food and drink that works for them. Way better than trying to trust an office to get it right for hundreds or thousands of people. So I think what you're going to see is higher employee retention for remote companies. And so one of the ways I would recommend to broach this topic is, listen, we can slow down turnover and increase loyalty and employee retention by treating people like adults and allowing them to work from wherever they're at. I would also recommend suggesting this on employee surveys. Just put it out there, like, would you like an option to work remotely? See what the feedback is. Maybe the organization has no interest in it and they'll tell you, but maybe they do. And it's one of those things that offering a remote option could even be seen as a perk bigger than a bonus or a promotion or a salary increase. I mean, this is people's lives we're talking about. And if you give them back hours of their day in commute and allow them to relocate to a place with a lower cost of living, to be near family, to be in a location with better air quality, and so on and so forth, that's dramatically changing the life of someone. If you do that at scale, you're probably going to have a happier workforce that wants to pour back into your business in a major way. If you're struggling to recruit, I suspect if you open it up to remote, you'll have an increase in qualified job applicants. That's a big thing. So it should shorten your cycle time on how fast you can scale. I mean, in 2019 alone, GitLab is going to grow from around 350 people to over 1,100. That is incredible growth in 1 year that would have in no way been possible in a co-located space. We're able to recruit and onboard that quickly because we do it remotely. Even from an office standpoint, imagine if we had an office in a high-rise in San Francisco that could fit 350 people at the beginning of the year. We would have had to have moved offices 3 or 4 times during the course of the year, each of which is like a multi-month tear down and rebuild, super inefficient. So if you want to scale more quickly, remote is a no-brainer. But at the very core of it, you have to find leaders that believe in it and that are willing. It's not a risk. I hate to say like take the risk on it, but to risk doing something differently that they may not feel equipped to do or be comfortable doing. But I think you asked this question now, but I think if you fast forward 5 years and look back, we're going to laugh at this video at how absurd this question is, because honestly, it's going to be that they're not going to have any choice. If you want to be able to recruit, it's going to be as foundational as offering compensation and benefits. It's like you can't hire people without compensation and benefits. And very soon, you're not going to be able to hire the best people without that autonomy and flexibility.
And when you say that, like do a company survey, then how I take that is that you say like, okay, look at the current employees as well. Like then it's not just about recruitment. It's about like, okay, current workforce, like what do they want? So then would you suggest that instead of focusing solely on like additional recruitment, should I take it more like holistically and more be looking at like, okay, as a whole company, let's shift, let's become a bit more mature to be remote friendly, and then that the recruitment is more like it's then something that can be dealt with differently instead of focusing like this can be a remote position.
Completely. So what I would recommend is actually transitioning the organization and the ethos of the organization into a remote friendly place before you start recruiting. Because what happens is if you just leave things as they are and then start recruiting for new functions and allow remote, create a hybrid remote organization, which has a lot of downsides. One of which is you have a subset of the company still that are coming into the office. And you have this new subset of the company that's being hired remotely. So you create this division right away where some of the company, they're upset that they still have to commute an hour or more a day, where this new subset doesn't have to do that. So there's a division of expectations right away. And you want to try to create as uniform and as flat and as level a playing field as you possibly can. That's why the ideal situation is to just have no offices. So not even the executive team gets together. Even the executive team has to communicate through Slack or whatever the methods may be, such that everyone is on a level playing field. Getting your company to that point as quickly as possible is more ideal for everyone.
But how fast can that happen? Like now getting even the executive team on Slack, be, slacking away and, asynchronous communication about strategy for 3 years. Like how fast can that, and let's say you start without a head of remote, you don't have that experience in-house. How fast can you do that?
Completely depends on the size of the company and what remote friendly infrastructure already exists. So I've worked remotely for a co-located company that did not have Slack or anything like it. So they just used face-to-face communication and email, and that was it. And functioning as a remote worker in that environment was difficult because I was always having to reach out and extract information. None of it was freely available. So in a situation like that, you're kind of going back to square one and implementing a remote communication infrastructure. I think the easiest way to answer this question is to go to leadership in an organization and say, okay, imagine, or actually try, sending everyone home for a week. What works? What breaks? What voids do you need filled? What things only worked when you had people face-to-face that now you need to find a remote mechanism for enabling? Because if you don't send everyone home, you may miss things that are kind of band-aided over by having enough people in the office and sort of make it work. But if you send everyone home, you'll immediately see, okay, we need to communicate issues this way. We need documentation for this. You'll just sort of be able to build a list. And I think you can build that list very quickly. How long it takes to implement depends on the size of the company. It depends on what tools you already have in place and so on and so forth. But I think that week-long practice, I think within a week, you have a pretty clear idea of what needs to be done.
It's like a disaster recovery day. It's like you figure out in how good of a shape you are.
Exactly. Yeah. If you want to know how fit you are, go try to climb Everest. And within a few days or a few hours, you'll know exactly what you need to work on.
But have you ever, I mean, maybe that's different because you guys have, you have been remote for so long, but I mean, I would miss going into the office. Like, is there a way, let's say you have a company that wants to explore all the benefits, like the added need for structure that will make us more efficient going forward, but still like, no, I will miss my coworkers and the nice vibe in the office.
Yeah, so at GitLab, we address that by reimbursing anyone that wants to work at a co-working space. So this is interesting, but we don't require that people work from home. We enable them to work from anywhere, but we understand that some people are very social, they're extroverts, they want to be amongst other people. So if they want to work every day in a co-working space, they totally can, and we'll fully reimburse that. All we say is that you can't come into an office, but we don't care where you work. Now, I've actually, there were people on my team that absolutely loved the office and joined GitLab not because we were all remote, but actually in spite of it. And they assumed that one of the things they were going to have to work out personally is, how do I get over the fact that I love going into the office and I don't have these opportunities? And within a month, one person in particular said, I'm a total convert. There's no way I could ever work back in an office again. I've saved so much money by not having to buy all of these expensive clothes that I usually need to go into the office. So what I thought was going to happen actually didn't. And I think why that is GitLab is very intentional about informal communication. So informal communication is what you probably love about going to an office, running into someone, catching up about the weekend, talking about what they are going to do for holiday plans, things like that. All of that can happen over a Zoom call. All of that can happen over a phone call. All of these mechanisms that we've put in place, and I'll put a link to this in the YouTube description, but we employ mechanisms. We work really hard to give people opportunity to connect with each other in and outside of work. And we also really value in-person interactions. So a lot of people have this concept that if you go all remote, none of your colleagues will ever see each other in person again. They can't even stand the thought of that. We actually get everyone, the entire company together every 9 to 12 months for GitLab Contribute, which is an unconference. We have an opening keynote, a closing keynote, and then everything in between is just excursions and opportunity for people to bond and connect. We also send smaller teams to sales events, marketing events, conferences, meetups, things like that. We get people together as often as we can. We have a visiting grant where we'll partially reimburse travel if one team member wants to travel anywhere else in the world and visit other team members. We've actually had a few people travel across 6 continents on this crazy, just around the world trip to visit as many people as they could and just kind of keep the tab running. We love to encourage that. And then for holiday parties, we give everyone a stipend so that they can travel or get together with people close to each other in specific regions of the world. There are ways to do it. And I think if you just look at everything as a pro and a con. If you really, really, really love going into the office, more than the expense of commuting, more than what it costs you, then maybe a co-located role really is best for you. But if you look at the pros and cons and you say, I really value being able to live and work in a place that makes me most fulfilled. I love being able to be a stay-at-home parent or a stay-at-home caregiver, or I'm a military spouse and my spouse has to move every 2 to 4 years and I don't want to have to restart my career every 2 to 4 years. These are the types of people where remote is ideally suited for them. And as a recruiting team, it opens up your pipeline in a huge way where you don't have to try to find the talent in a very specific region or recruit them to come there. And then the last thing I'll say on this is a lot of companies say, we're not remote, we can't go remote, but then they have more than one office. So if you have an office in Seattle and then you have an office in Singapore or London or somewhere else in the world, whether you like it or not, you are remote. You have colleagues that are remote to one another with massive time zones between them. They don't get together in person every day. They have to have some sort of digital method of communication. You're probably already enacting a lot of remote policies and you have a remote infrastructure without actually thinking about it. So reframing that to say, actually, you have 2 or more teams that are remote to each other. Would it really be so bad to just let everybody be remote? That's another way to broach that topic when you're talking to companies that have multiple headquarters.
And then what you say now that it's like you're experimenting with finding different ways, and it seems like you're learning, and then so people can travel and meet people that are the closest for holidays. And but how do you, I don't know who sets sort of the guidelines or the strategy for continuing this journey, but how do you keep improving? Like, how can you keep the bar high for yourself, since it's almost like a limited field in the top there, like leading the way? So how can you keep aiming higher, and where do you find inspiration for this?
I think a lot of it comes back to empowerment. We will empower anyone in the company to think about these things. We encourage anyone at the company to take a look at our informal communication guidelines, our visiting grant, our holiday party grant, all of that, and think about ways that they can make these better. In fact, just this year, we had someone on the GitLab team put forth a merge request to double the budget of the holiday party budget, because they were doing the math and they were saying, people, we want to get people that are relatively close to each other. Pacific Northwest is a good example, in the Seattle, Portland, Oregon area in the US. We want to be able to get people together, but with only this budget, it's not really possible. And this might be our only time to get together for the whole year. So this person came up with an idea of how to make this better, and then they assigned it to the right parties. So our CFO had to take a look at it. I mean, there are financial considerations that have to happen, but in the end, it was approved, and it was something that was built upon. So when you, as a member of the team, if you see things like this happening, it gives you natural inspiration to continue to think about what else could we do on top of this to continue expanding and continue to make this better. Just this year, there was a kind of a virtual pizza party that I'd never seen done before, where the security team, I think it was, got everyone on their team around the globe to, whenever dinner or lunch was for them, they would go buy a pizza, and then they would share it in Slack, and like they would have their kids and family together. And it was like this huge, like 24-hour long pizza party, because people are in all different time zones. But that kind of thing actually can't really happen in a co-located space. So there are some fun, quirky ways to build bonds amongst teams that are actually only possible remotely. In terms of continually improving, it's something that needs to be woven into the fabric of the company. If it's one person's responsibility, it becomes really tough for that person to have the full purview of the company of how do we make this better. If you empower everyone to do it, you get more ideas. I mean, this is the concept of beta testing a product. If you have your own team testing a certain piece of software, they may think of some things to improve before they ship it. But if you ship it to thousands of beta testers, you're going to get so much feedback, so many amazing ideas that you didn't even think to test. And honestly, culture can work similarly, where you let everyone beta test culture, bring their ideas to the table, and then through the correct process, kind of figure out what gets built upon. I'll give you one good example. So at GitLab, we have this thing called an onboarding buddy. So everyone that comes on to the company is assigned one person that can either direct one-on-one contact. You can ask them anything you want. We understand that you're getting up to speed, and it's nice to have that shoulder to lean on. So I had a call with my onboarding buddy about 2 weeks into her role. And I said, tell me some feedback, like what's been good, what's been bad. And she said, well, one of the things that was interesting was I didn't get this new hire orientation feel that I have experienced before in a co-located space, where I showed up in the lobby with 30 other people. And even though we worked in disparate areas of the company, we were able to tour the building together and commiserate and sort of build bonds that will last throughout our time here at the company. That didn't really exist here. And I got to thinking about that. And we have a Slack channel that's devoted to announcing all of the new team members on a week-to-week basis. And I thought, what if we made an iteration to the onboarding buddy page where me as a buddy would suggest to a new hire, hey, if you want that more social, conventional new hire orientation, just put out a call in the new Labbers channel, try to get together, gather a Zoom call, maybe do a couple of them a week, and get everybody that was new in your week together for a Zoom call. Like, learn about what they like to do. What are their hobbies? What are their struggles in their first week of work? What are some cool things they learned about GitLab that maybe somebody else didn't know? And this would, to the best we can, replicate that new hire orientation experience. So we were able to put that forth in our people team, merge that, and that is now one of the requirements of being an onboarding buddy. So that was someone that was only 2 weeks into the job, but had a great idea of how we could continue to improve and build culture and build bonds. And it's because this person had a voice at 2 weeks that change was made. Because me, I'm months into the role, I'm well past that. Like, I'm never going to stop and think about how I can make that element better. You need someone that's in it to think about it and put forth the proposal of how to make it better.
Okay, I have one bigger question, but I just want to sneak one small in there.
Yeah,
So
sure.
when these changes happen and you have a good idea, or you want to share something like a learning and like spread it to all of the corners of the world, like what means are you using to communicate to make sure that, you know, this will reach as many as possible?
So internally or externally?
Now internally, like,
Internally.
so that everybody knows that, you know, 2 week in, you know, you can still have a voice.
Yeah. So probably won't surprise you, but we actually have a handbook section on how to make a company-wide announcement. So we document processes about anything and everything, even something as mundane as how do you make a company-wide announcement. So generally what we'll do is once a merge request has been accepted and it has been applied and it will impact a broad swath of the company, we encourage people to jump on the company call. We have a company call 4 days a week. Make the announcement there on a Zoom call. It can be hundreds of people. And then for anybody that cannot attend that call, we use the company announcement Slack channel, and we just say, as announced in the company call, here's the textualized version of that. That way people can absorb that information asynchronously at a time that's convenient to them.
Did you say 4 times a week?
Yep. So Monday through Thursday, we have a 30-minute call, and we do things like announcing promotions, raises, discretionary bonuses, as well as kind of general things that are changing. That onboarding buddy was a good one. So henceforth, if you're an onboarding buddy, heads up that there's a new requirement. Here's the merge request with the details of why it changed, and make sure you ask your new onboard or your new hires if they want that and if you can facilitate that.
Okay. That's like, it seemed often. That's why I reacted. But
yeah. I mean, it's but you know, if people don't have an office to go into, without these kind of standing opportunities to see each other's faces, you do risk kind of losing that culture and losing that face-to-face bond. And look, we don't always have 100% attendance on those calls, but if you can't make them, we have a company call agenda, a Google Doc attached to every single call, and that so you can read that and sort of participate asynchronously. You can put an announcement there and then have somebody else verbalize it for you if you can't make the call, or for whatever reason you're traveling, you can't make it in person, you can pull up that document and see what happened.
So what I should take with me is that with remote, like the need for those, like, you know, company all hands, that it increases, like, you know, the cadence of it.
Yeah, it can't hurt. And I would implement anything like that as asynchronously as possible. So these company calls would be more a burden than a utility if we did not have a Google Doc attached to each one, so you could go in and see what's happening on a daily basis. Because it's just not practical to join those calls 4 times a week for people. But by being able to open that Google Doc and see what people announced on the call and just read that on your own time, it's massive because you're able to stay plugged into the company. That way, when you do attend a company call live, you're fully up to speed and you feel like you've heard and seen everything that's been announced up until that point.
So it's one of those, like, keep the heartbeats.
You have to. Yeah, you have to. Look, honestly, ineffective onboarding and losing the values that bind us are 2 of GitLab's biggest risks. So we actually publish what we believe to be the biggest risks to the company. And those are 2 of them. And losing the values that bind us is really, really big. And keeping people connected to the heartbeat of the company, keeping them engaged, even if it's asynchronously, is really vital. Because if the culture ever starts to degrade and people stop believing in the values that actually got the company to where they are, you start to introduce dysfunction to the company. So we continually think about, how do we avoid that? How do we make sure that people have the right information when they're onboarding so they know where to start, they know who to ask? We minimize as many frustrations as possible. We know a lot of people are brand new to remote work. So designing an effective workspace for them in their home is something that's completely foreign to them. So we have workspace pages where people are able to put forth suggestions on what works well for them. And we have a remote channel where people can ask seasoned veterans of remote how to do this if it's something that's new to them. Having as many support systems as you can is vital.
Perfect. I was actually going to ask you about that, so thank you for asking.
Yeah.
wondering it, this like about what you guys see as like, what are your challenges like right now in like continuing this? Because it is like things get more difficult, at least like from my experience, like with scale. It's like what was a small problem became a big problem. So
It's
as you're
interesting.
growing so much.
It's interesting. All remote companies, by and large, scale much better than co-located spaces because you don't have the things like the office changes. And when you have 1,000 people documenting solutions versus it all falling to 3 or 4, obviously it's much easier to scale the complete knowledge base of the company. So it scales much better, practically speaking, but I do know what you mean. If you bring people into the organization at a rapid pace and you don't give them permission to drop the organizational baggage that they may be bringing from their last company, you risk them not giving themselves permission to truly do things different in a remote environment. So if they just try to replicate what used to work in a co-located space in a remote space, it creates a lot of friction and dysfunction. And you want to work hard to avoid that. So a lot of it comes back to onboarding for us. We are very diligent about onboarding. We have an issue that has over 200 tasks, which looks daunting, but we would rather have the information there for you to consume and go through at your own time versus giving you 2 or 3 things to do. And then it's just kind of like choose your own adventure, figure it out as you go. That's how most companies onboard, which is a really inefficient and poor way to onboard. It doesn't really give you the most confidence that the company cares about your long-term investment when it's like, oh, here are 2 or 3 things. And, we're just going to put you into whatever fire is currently burning and like figure it out as you go. So we try to be as deliberate as possible when it comes to onboarding and surfacing that information.
And when you said like you give an issue with like a lot of different tasks, that means like I'm assigned to an issue and that's what I should complete. Like with finishing my onboarding means completing these tasks.
For sure. So it's very easily understood if you are done with onboarding or not, because you have more boxes to check.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds super rudimentary, but it takes the ambiguity out of it. And so your manager is able to look at your onboarding issue and say like, oh, I see that you haven't done these 4 things. Something I can help with on that. Instead of in a co-located space, it's like, oh, the person's been here 2 weeks. Surely they're onboarded. And when you look at them, there's a big smile on their face and you think, oh, they're onboarded. They're happy. But like internally, they're completely anxious. They have no idea what's going on. And so it's not super easy to read people. I mean, you think because you're sitting beside them, but really you may not. And so by being very deliberate about the onboarding issue and having those tasks arranged in that way, it's super clear whether someone needs help on something. And we would just rather it be deliberate than not.
One of the biggest learnings I've had after reading up on remote work is that someone said, actually creating structures that enable remote work, if you do that, it's going to benefit everyone. So that, what you say about being meticulous about onboarding, I mean, that is not only something valuable for a remote worker, that's valuable for any type of worker. So it's actually having that in my mind gives it so much more value.
Completely. Look, being fully remote forces you to do everything that you should do in a co-located company, but you have to do it much earlier and much more meticulously, much better, because you can't get away with using the Band-Aid of just meetings and meetings and meetings and sort of word of mouth, like tapping someone on the shoulder and asking them something that should have been documented 2 years ago. So a lot of what I'm saying should be applied in co-located companies. Being adherent to documentation and processes would also serve a co-located company. I mean, look, remote work isn't suited for every company. If you're building hardware like Tesla, for example, if you're building vehicles, currently right now, it would be difficult to conceive that company working remotely. Now, we may get to a place where surgical robots are a thing. So in theory, you can operate on someone remotely. And so maybe we'll get to the point where vehicles can do that too. But currently, anything involving hardware and manufacturing, very difficult to do remotely. But if your outputs are primarily digital, you have knowledge workers, people show up in an office, open a computer and stare at it all day, that's a telltale sign that your company could be remote. But a lot of what makes a remote company work well should be done at a co-located space as well. So it's not like, one is from Earth, one is from Mars. It's just that remote forces you to do some of those things that are kind of easy to ignore or sort of pass aside in a co-located space.
Yeah. And then looking into the future, because so we've seen agile. It came and it conquered a lot of people's minds, and now that way of working, like short iterations, learn fast, has now reached like even the more like slower moving industries. So as we now see that remote is now becoming like more and more top of mind, what would you say is the thing after remote?
What I hope is we see a revolution in hiring junior staff and interns remotely. So even at GitLab, we have just now implemented our first internship policy years after the company's inception. So it's been difficult to hire junior staff because a lot of junior staff wouldn't have the experience being a manager of one. And you need a certain amount of scale to devote people within the company to mentoring them, to teach them those things. So my hope is that educational institutions begin to explore and teach the manager of one mentality. They begin listing and referencing remote companies in their coursework, and they start enabling remote projects and dissertations and things like that, so that people don't necessarily have to be on campus to do these things.
Sorry, just one thing. When
Yeah.
you say manager of one, is that self-leadership? Or what do you mean?
It can be. Manager of one is a sub-value at GitLab, and it encompasses many things. It's being self-aware to understand when you need help, to understand that you need to reach out and ask for help if you need it, because people can't see you in an office.
Mm-hmm.
Just come over to you and see it. But it also is, it has its roots in autonomy and empowerment, which is we don't expect you to clock into and out of an office in a certain time frame. Mm-hmm. If you can get your job done, you can do it at any cadence you want. Work for a couple of hours, go for a hike, come back at night and work through dinner, whatever suits you. You can be a manager of your own time. It even applies to things like meetings. So for example, if there's an hour-long meeting, multiple people are talking, you give your spiel at the beginning, but then you just want to kind of keep it on in the background just in case something is useful to you. It's totally okay for you to just check out of the meeting. Like you can be looking at another screen, working on some other project. And then if you kind of hear your name, it's okay to ask someone, hey, could you repeat that? You know, I was on the call, but I'm not here. I'm managing my own time. Totally fine. So it impacts all levels of what we expect of GitLabbers. Self-management is big, but it even plays into things like meetings, where we give people the ability to manage their own time. And we just trust that people are going to manage their days however they need to. They don't have to ask anyone. So that's what I mean about junior staff and interns. Yeah. At a junior level, sometimes it's difficult to understand what that even means. You need some amount of life experience to even understand what that could look like, and to compartmentalize, okay, this is life, it's happening now, then I'm going to come back to work, and then if I got sidetracked by life again, this is how I'll figure it out, without having to consult a manager every single time you need to do that. That's being a manager. Mm-hmm. So I know when I was in university, all of the internship opportunities that I was giving, they were all local. So they were all in co-located spaces that were relatively close to the university. I would love to see programs start embracing remote work and would actually help university students find remote opportunities, not necessarily look at whatever's in their backyard. So I don't think we're there yet, but I think with the proliferation of online universities and online education, hopefully we're closer than we have been in the past. I think AR and VR has a big potential to enable more remote companies. So I mentioned a manufacturing company, for example. Mm-hmm. It's really difficult to do remotely right now. But I think if AR and VR is done well, you could do some hands-on training that you once could only do in the field, but now with the right space, you actually could do that remotely. So difficult to see how that's going to play out. AR and VR are still very much in its infancy, but I think it could enable certain companies to do remote. I mean, I look at GitLab, the advent of Zoom video calls, the advent of 5G, 4G LTE, there's certain network infrastructure things that have happened in the last 10 to 20 years that enable GitLab to do what we do. And so I think AR and VR can be in that next wave of enabling an even broader swath of companies. But I think the last big revolution is going to be a more global default to asynchronous communication. For many, many years now, we've defaulted to synchronous communication. We want people in the office from a certain hour until a certain hour. And the reason we want that is so that they can sync up and be in the same time zone, in the same meetings, in theory, to create efficiencies. Now, this made perfect sense before the invention of the internet. When there was no way to digitally communicate, yeah, it's more efficient to get people in the room at the same time. Totally get it. But that is still the de facto way to work years after we've been able to communicate digitally. It makes no sense. Like, why haven't we evolved as a society on how we work? So GitLab is fully asynchronous. We don't even try to lock towards certain time zones. Now, granted, time zones are the bane of our existence, and we have to work really hard to overcome them, but it helps us make GitLab, the product, much better, because we have to design it in a way where people can move projects forward in an asynchronous fashion, and people can have a discussion board so they can put forth their ideas, assuming that no one else is online. And then when the rest of their team wakes up, they can look at what was there, understand the context, and then move the project forward. So it helps that we are building a product that enables async, and it helps us to continue to iterate on that product to make it more async friendly. But I think overall, that's going to be a big thing, especially even in co-located companies that have multiple headquarters. Embracing asynchronous and figuring out a way to do asynchronous well is a much more efficient way to do it long term than forcing someone to get up at 2:30 in the morning to be on a meeting.
Yeah. That would be what I would want to learn to be better at. Yes, facilitating meetings that don't have to be meetings. Like how, because it's one thing with information or sync or updates, but when it's actually problem solving or innovation, what you said, give people the context of the problem and give your input, then they give their input, then you give yours. That would be like a brain exercise.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll link to how we do meetings as well. We do everything we can to avoid meetings so that we force ourselves to try to figure out solutions asynchronously. And then only as a last resort will we go to a meeting. If it becomes obvious that you're going to go rapidly back and forth on something 3 or 5 times, sometimes in those cases, it does make sense to have a synchronous meeting, in which case we try to get the fewest people as necessary so that it inconveniences the fewest people necessary. And then, of course, even in that synchronous meeting, we document. So as each person is talking, the other person is note-taking. Therefore, even after that, you can put forth the notes from that meeting, and it's as if anyone that had to participate asynchronously essentially was there. The danger is, oh, let's just have a quick 15-minute chat. We're not going to document it because, nothing major is going to come of it. Everything is major. Like, everything needs to be documented. If you're going to have a meeting, someone needs to be documenting it. And that is a great way to force people to not have meetings that they don't need. When you know that you have to document it, you're going to think long and hard on how necessary is this meeting. So not only does it benefit everyone in the company, it's a great forcing function, sort of a filter, a vet on how necessary is this, or could we just communicate this through a Google Doc or a GitLab issue, something that's more async friendly.
Well, that's perfect. Well, so I don't have any more questions. So I'm just going to thank you for your time. This was inspiring. It's fun to hear from someone like in the midst of that, and then see what you said. 5 years from now, we're going to look and see how naive I was now.
That's the goal. That's the march of progress. I hope we look back in 5 years and all of these things that are new now are just silly and everybody gets them instinctually. No, thank you very much for taking the time to do this. Thank you for the amazing questions. Hopefully our audience gets a lot out of it. And I'll be sure to list Because Mondays and all of the information that we talked about in the YouTube description below.